This is the Durga Yantra. Legend has it that drawing this symbol brings courage, strength and victory over your enemies. When I was drawing this, I was trying to think of a time when I've had to be exceptionally strong in my life, but nothing compares to what my granddad had to go through. He was torn from his home by Russian soldiers, dumped in the forest without any shoes, and just had to survive. Let me tell you what Jack Corvin went through. So it's 1918, right? World War I has ended, and the newly formed Polish government decides to allocate land to ex-soldiers. And my granddad Jack, his dad was a pilot during World War I. So he was given a plot of land. He was also given a couple of horses, a loan, and a load of building materials. So he built a house and some stables, and he basically set up a sweet farm, like totally self-sufficient. He had everything he needed for his family. And he and his wife had 5 kids, 3 girls, 2 boys. Jack, my granddad, was the eldest. As a child, my granddad helped run the farm. And when he became an adult, he took over the farm because his dad was busy being the chairman of the local council. And then in 1939, the Germans and the Russians invaded Poland because the Nazis and the Soviets, they were allies. And they had decided that they were going to divide Poland up between them. So when Jack heard about this, he got on his bike with his brother and they set off to their uncle's farm, which was closer to the border. And they were thinking, you know, they'll find out what's going on over there. And on the way, they passed through villages that were smouldering because they'd been bombed by the Germans. And they ended up spending the night at this farm. And in the morning, they spotted Russian soldiers heading west. So they decided to turn back and head home. The next morning, Jack's dad set off for work, but he didn't come home. Instead, the family just received a letter from him saying that he was retreating with some other Polish soldiers. And that's because the Russians were going around arresting any Polish soldiers or officials. So the whole family was on high alert that night. Jack and his brother Alex, they were waiting by the door with loaded rifles. But no one came. And then the next morning they decided to hide their weapons in case they would need them. And when the Russians did finally come knocking, they demanded that they hand over all their firearms. And Jack said that they'd already given them to another officer. And these Russians didn't believe him. They searched the place, couldn't find any weapons. They still didn't believe him, and they ended up arresting Jack and taking him away. Not sure what happened there, but they ended up releasing him and he went back. But when he went back, he found out that they had taken all their horses. A few days go by and Jack's dad comes back. But instead of wearing his normal suit, you know, he was normally looking all fancy. He looked haggard. He was wearing like farmer's clothes and trying to look like a peasant. He was in disguise. A few months went by and things were calm. Christmas came and went. They didn't really celebrate, but, you know, they got by. They would normally hunt during Christmas time and, you know, get loads of meat and everything. But they didn't this year because they didn't want anyone to hear that they had weapons. And so, yeah, it's winter. They're just chilling. And then suddenly a man shows up at the farm seeking shelter. He was a teacher and he's saying that he's wanted and there was a local militia looking for him. And Jack's dad was thinking, man, I'm next. So these 2 men, they made a run for the border together. And that was the last my granddad would ever see or hear of his dad. By the way, if you want to draw this symbol with me, you can watch the full tutorial on geometercircle.com. So that night, the whole family, they dug a hole in the kitchen and buried all their guns, all their valuables. And they were thinking that, you know, if they do get arrested or whatever, they can at least come back and get all the stuff. But in the middle of the night, 2 Russian officers come to the door, ransack the place, find nothing, obviously. But then they order the entire family to pack clothes, food, whatever they need, and get on a sleigh that was waiting outside in the snow. And they were taken to a train station and shoved onto a cargo train with everyone else from the village. And they spent 3 weeks on that train. During this time, more than 1 million people were deported from Poland to Siberia. Any members of the government or police, any officials, they were executed. And after 21 days, the train stopped in the middle of a forest in Siberia, and everyone was ordered to take off their shoes and get out. And then the train took off. So there was a bunch of them, and they were just abandoned there in the forest, way out there. And so, you know, it was January, so it was the middle of winter. They had to get straight to it. They started building a shelter. They built a shelter out of mud and sticks, like a simple dugout, and got a fire going. And they figured out that there were some farmers nearby. Apparently they were Mongolians, and they would go sneak into their farms, steal some livestock, take it back to their, walk it back to their camp, and then slaughter it. And they were also foraging for berries, but unfortunately some of these were poisonous, and a bunch of the people in the camp died after eating them. I'm not sure how long that went on for, but eventually they discovered this nearby village, and they started trading. They were trading their clothes for bread and rope, and they used the rope to make their shoes. They would form the shape of a shoe and then let it freeze, and then just wear these rope shoes. And then at some point the Russians came and took them to a block of flats in that village, and they were given a room which they shared with another family. But there was nothing in this room, no bed, nothing, so they would all just sleep on the floor. Jack's little sister ended up getting a job in the bakery, and they paid her in bread. No money, just bread, flour and sugar. And Jack and his brother, Alex, they got jobs in a sawmill. They were stacking logs to be taken down the river. So they spent the rest of the winter and spring there, and then they were taken up the river to an abandoned gulag where they continued logging. And soon the rest of the family joined them. They were all back together. And they had this room in the gulag. They had some beds, they had blankets, they had a stove. Life was pretty good for that summer. And then winter came around, and it got down to -30. There was no way to really stay warm. Work dried up because everything was freezing. So they would fish, and they would also cut blocks of ice to sell to people with cellars. And they did that all winter. And then when summer came back around and the river had thawed, Jack and Alex would make some money unloading steamboats that came to deliver supplies to all the remote villages. And so life was getting pretty good again. You know, Siberia in the summertime is really nice. And then I guess Germany and the Soviet Union fell out, and Germany launched an attack. And all the Soviets were called up to fight, including everyone that was working on the steamboat. So Jack and Alex were hired to work full-time on one of the steamers. And they were working 4 hours on, 4 hours off for months, going up and down the river, delivering rations to people. And they did that until they docked back in the village where their family was. And when they got back, they heard news that a Polish army was being formed in southern Russia, and they wanted to join. So the whole family jumped on a train, and they were just like, they were in a box, you know, and they were sharing it with these 5 brothers. One of the brothers got off at a station in Kazakhstan to buy some food, and he didn't make it back in time, and the train just took off without him. And obviously these brothers were devastated. So they were on this train until they got to Uzbekistan. Apparently the Uzbeks were really nice, really hospitable. They shared all their food with them. And then when it was time to carry on, they went to the town that they would depart from. But it was evening when they arrived, and the women and children were offered shelter for the night. But Jack and Alex, they went and reserved a place on the barge that they were going on tomorrow. And so they slept there. Then when they woke up, they discovered the barge had already set off without their mother and their sisters. So now it was just them and the 4 brothers. And this barge was rough, completely unsanitary, lice everywhere. A lot of the passengers died on that journey. People were even just jumping off and taking their chances in the middle of nowhere. And when they finally arrived at their destination, they found their mother and sisters were already there waiting for them. And they were saying that they'd had a really nice, pleasant journey. So now they all jump on camels, and they're still with the 4 brothers. And they go to an Uzbek village that had a lot of empty buildings because Stalin had just murdered the majority of the population. But there wasn't any work there, so they ended up selling pretty much everything they'd managed to gather. And they got word that the army was being formed in Iran. So they decided to set off immediately. But Jack got sick, so he couldn't go. So Alex left with a bunch of other men, and Jack and the rest of the family were going to catch up when he was feeling better. And then when Alex got to Kerman in Iran, he was given a blanket and sent to the barracks. But then he got typhoid and just lost consciousness. Woke up 3 days later, and every single one of his travel companions had died. And he wasn't strong enough to continue the journey. So he was put to work in the kitchen, serving civilians and refugees. And then one day he spotted his sisters and his mother, but no Jack. The 4 brothers were there too. And he said that his mom was looking rough. Like she'd aged like 20 years in the last few days. And then she ended up getting dysentery and died within a few days. All 4 brothers died as well. And then he started training for the army once he got his strength back. And then his sister got sick and died as well. So he had no idea where Jack was. He only had 2 sisters left. They all got split up because the girls were sent to be looked after by this Polish woman. And later on they heard from the Red Cross that the 2 sisters, they ended up being taken in by a Maharaj in India, along with loads of other Polish women. And apparently they lived a very comfortable life after that. But there was still no news from Jack. Alex ended up being moved around a lot with the army. He went to Iraq, Palestine, Israel, all over the place. Meanwhile, Jack somehow made his way to Iran. And now the British army were stationed there. They had a regiment there. And Jack ended up joining them because they were taking in Polish refugees and training them to fight for England. He had absolutely no idea where Alex was anymore. The army obviously told him that the rest of his family was dead or in India. And he ended up joining the Navy. And he went on the ORP Berza. It was a Polish ship, a destroyer. And he never spoke about his time in the Navy. But we do know that the Berza saw combat at least 3 times. And it was involved in the sinking of a few German ships. After the war, he ended up settling in England. And that was when he changed his name from Vladek to Jack. And that's the whole reason that I'm even speaking to you in English right now. But yeah, so I just wanted to tell that story so we don't forget, what he went through. Thanks for listening. Ta-ra.